If I'm the only maintainer and don't dedicate time to the project, how can the project continue to evolve? How can it be useful to others? I think if someone wants to be a maintainer and has the necessary skills to be a maintainer, is welcome to be part of the project.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 267. To fork or not to fork? Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, you and I both work with open source projects. The one I work with has been around for almost 2 decades. How long has Crossplane been around?
Much less. I'm not sure. Probably less than 10 years.
Less than 10 years. On today's show, we have Charles, and then I will let him say his real name. We have Charles on from Nirmata, and we're going to talk about a project that's not even 10 years old. Hey, Charles, it's good to talk to you today. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm going good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
So you work with a project called Kyverno Chainsaw, or just for the rest of this show, Chainsaw.
Yes, it's a project that was started by the Kyverno team, and we needed a tool to execute and test Kyverno deeply. I mean, end-to-end tests. So we started with the tool, then we weren't happy with the tool we were using at the time, and finally decided to create a new tool with more capabilities, and this tool is known today as Chainsaw. It's a very recent project, but yes, we are not 10 years old yet. We are not even 1 year old yet, so it's still a baby.
You said you started out with a different tool to do what you were doing and decided that tool was not, my word, not good enough. So you had to come up with something else. What made that other tool not good enough?
The first thing is that the other tool was mostly unmaintained. So we didn't have new features added in the project. Bug fixes were not coming. So this was the first problem, like finding a bug, trying to report the bug, expect the bug to be fixed, but nothing happened. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of tools available to run end-to-end tests for Kubernetes admission controllers or things like this. So we didn't have a lot of choice except this tool. We tried to contribute upstream to the tool and at some point to join forces with the community behind this tool. But it proved to be challenging. So we had to give up with the idea. It worked. We had to work around the limitations of the tool. And at some point, we have the chance to be part of the CNCF community with the Kyverno project. So we could start an LFX mentorship to add the missing features to the old tool we were using, and then an LFX mentee joined to do just that. We worked around a few limitations, and at the same time, we realized that fixing everything was going to be complicated and not necessarily very beneficial to the community, because everything we were fixing would probably not be accepted upstream. So it would stay in our fork only for our specific usage. It's interesting because at the same time, we were building another project that was going to allow running Kyverno outside Kubernetes cluster. This project was Kyverno JSON. It created a new category of policies, and those policies were not limited to just Kubernetes resources and things like this. So combining what we did for Kyverno JSON with the improvements we were doing in the tool we were using at the time could become a perfect match to build a tool that could replace this old tool. At the middle of the mentorship, we started this new project from scratch, trying to combine both knowledge we had from the old tool, the limitations we wanted to cover and to overcome, with the new tool we were building for the Kyverno JSON project. We started small, and finally the project evolved at a point where we could replace entirely the old tool we were using with the new one, Chainsaw, without changing anything in our tests, because we were backward compatible with the old tool. So we just changed the binary, running the tests, and it worked. It worked for Kyverno. Then from that, we started talking with other folks, working on other projects that were using the same old tool as us. For example, Victor is one of them. And then we discussed how they could adopt Chainsaw in place of the old tool. And we started contributing a lot to other projects to make this happen. And yeah, this all started like this, actually.
Kyverno is in CNCF, right?
Yes.
And Chainsaw is in Kyverno.org, right? In GitHub.
Yes.
How does that work? Do all the projects in the org become automatically CNCF? Because I know some other projects like Cilium Tetragon, right? Automatically became CNCF projects simply because it's in the same org. Is that somehow how it works, or is Chainsaw in CNCF because it's a part of Kyverno, or separate?
Yes, I think ultimately CNCF manages projects at the org level. So basically, every project in the org becomes a CNCF project. I don't know how they promote those side projects or advertise those side projects, but they become part of the CNCF because they are in the Kyverno org.
Nice. I saw you around in different communities. What was very interesting for me is that, okay, you created, I mean, when I say you, I mean, folks in Kyverno, in Nirmata created a project, open source it, part of CNCF, that's absolutely amazing. But what compelled you to put additional effort into it? Like, hey, I want to let people know about it. I want to get feedback. I mean, I saw you all around asking people for feedback as if it's a project in a way. Not project, product, right? You were acting almost like a product person, product manager or something like that. Hey, give me feedback. I want to know how can I spend more of my time on this thing.
Actually, I was very happy with what we did. So to me, it made sense to go around, talk with folks, and see if this could be useful for them. I have the chance to participate in a couple of conferences, and then it happens that I meet other folks in real life. Then we talk about the evolutions, the things we do. Some folks were interested in the tool. Then we came back from the conference. we continued the discussion asynchronously on Slack or in the community. And finally, I think everyone wanted, because this old tool I was talking about was used by a lot of other projects, other communities, and I didn't think I could convince big organizations. Today, Grafana is using Chainsaw, OpenTelemetry is using Chainsaw, some other big projects are using Chainsaw, and I thought that it would be extremely difficult to convince them to adopt Chainsaw. But actually, I realized that they were facing the same limitations as we were facing with the Kyverno project. So they were having problems correctly testing their operators, their webhooks, and things like this. They were frustrated with all the limitations and everything they couldn't do with the old tool. So actually, when I proposed to migrate to Chainsaw, especially when you tell them that you don't really need to change your test because Chainsaw is almost backward compatible with the old tool, they were quite happy. They said, oh, cool, this finally happened. And when we tried to contribute to the old tool and to join the community, we started discussing with other people in the community that were interested in being part of the effort to maintain the old tool. But it never happened. So we were a couple of individuals discussing how can we help fix the bugs, add features, because we all ended up forking the project, adding what we needed to the old tool without sharing what we did. Because instead of having one tool, everyone ended up maintaining their own fork with their specificities. And every time we were going to start this new project, something happened. The main maintainer behind the old tool showed up and said, okay, I will merge your PRs, your pull requests, and then we didn't start the new tool. So I had a couple of contacts that were very interested in something new, actually, because we talked about the idea to create this new thing a few times before. It didn't happen because Ken just came up and told us that he was going to spend more time on the project, but it never really happened. So the old tool stayed the old tool. It didn't evolve. I think right now the last release for the old tool is more than 1 year old. So it's not really maintained. There's no active contributions and things like this. And finally, all this historic helped promoting Chainsaw, find people interested in it. Really, it was quite easy because the feedback I had when discussing with other teams working on other projects was, yeah, you solved the problems we had with the old tool. So we are very happy to switch to Chainsaw, actually. You know, sometimes it's hard to ask people to migrate from one tool to another tool, but it didn't happen with Chainsaw. It was actually very easy to convince those folks. It's almost like they were waiting for something like Chainsaw. And getting feedback is also important because that's the way we make sure that what we are doing is useful for someone else. We are not adding, for example, we are not adding features if no one needs it. We don't want to spend time on a feature if no one is going to use it just for the pleasure of getting the new feature in. It doesn't make really sense.
What is very strange to me, to be honest, is that until recently, right? As far as I know, there was only one tool, the tool you were mentioning, which is Cuttle or Kutl. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It's so strange that given that Kubernetes is so big and so many people are using it and so many people are developing their own custom resources and controllers and what's not, we have only one tool to actually run tests against Kubernetes resources. That's, to me, so unpleasantly surprising, right? Normally, you would expect if something is so big as Kubernetes that there would be, I don't know, bunch of tools that can help with testing it, right? But there isn't.
Honestly, I don't know any other tool like Cuttle and now like Chainsaw. So we don't have one tool, we have two tools. We have Chainsaw now. But at the time, there was only Cuttle. I think it doesn't mean that people don't test their code. But maybe they are doing it without using any tool. They are probably writing some Golang code to build their end-to-end tests. But writing code to run the test is perfectly fine. It's just more work. It takes more time. It's harder to maintain. It's probably not black box as it should. Because if you write code, you probably have access to the details of the implementation. So the test may be opinionated. If you don't have the code, let's say someone is giving you just the Helm chart and the Docker image, it can become more difficult to write the tests because, well, you don't have the Golang structs eventually. What if the controller itself is not written in Golang? Maybe tomorrow we will have controllers written in Rust or in other languages. So it can become challenging to write tests in Golang for a project that is not written in Golang itself. The value of Cuttle and Chainsaw now is the declarative approach to end-to-end tests. And that's what makes Chainsaw and Cuttle unique, because you just have to write a couple of YAML manifests to create a test. You don't need to know a programming language. You don't need to learn how Golang works. You don't need to learn how Kubernetes is going to marshal and unmarshal your YAML manifest into a Golang struct and all the specifics, things that happen in Golang and in client Go and things like this. To write a test, you just create the definition for your resource and expect the controller to react to this new resource and to adapt the observed state to the desired state. In the end, if you don't reach the desired state, there's something wrong.
Thinking back on all of the work that you did, not just you, but everybody involved in Chainsaw did to bring it to life, would you do it again?
Definitely. I think that we learned a lot of things. We have the tool that we wanted in the first place. So we wanted exactly the tool we have today. So this is what we expected to have from Cuttle, and I didn't make it. So that's why we created Chainsaw. If Cuttle was the tool we needed, we wouldn't have created Chainsaw. Chainsaw exists just because Cuttle was not good enough for our needs.
And to restate it, initially you had forked Cuttle.
Yeah.
And you chose to stay with the fork. You would almost leave. Then the maintainer would merge the PRs. You would stick around until eventually you said no more. And that's when Chainsaw started to life.
Yes, because the fundamental model behind Chainsaw is implemented in Kyverno JSON with the assertion trees concept and things like this that are too advanced to be accepted in a project like Cutter. Even small pull requests were not accepted in Cutter. So we didn't have any hope that one day they would accept something like assertion trees or mutation trees or everything we did in Chainsaw. There are things in Cutter that I don't like very much, like the fact that every test is based on file name conventions. And I don't like that too much, but I could have accepted it. But those fundamental changes we did to make assertions a lot more powerful than what Cutter offered at the time, I think it was impossible to imagine that the Cutter community would accept such a contribution. So if we wanted to have the level of flexibility we needed in the assertion syntax, in the resource templates, and things like this, the bindings, the way we can pass values to a test, this would have been impossible to add this in Cutter. And even in our fork, because the Cutter code base was not really adapted to work with those new concepts we wanted to introduce. We would have needed to rewrite most of Cutter, and it would have taken more time to adapt Cutter to those new concepts than starting from scratch, actually. So starting from scratch was really what allowed us more freedom, more flexibility, less pain in the maintenance area. And yes, I think they are so different now. They look similar, but they are extremely different, actually. And that's funny because when we created Chainsaw, we kept comparing Cutter and Chainsaw. And more the time passes, now we are not really comparing with Cutter anymore. Chainsaw has really his own identity now, in my opinion.
So do you still see a place for Cuddle, even though you consider them, or maybe not consider them, a competitor to what you're doing in Chainsaw? Is it still relevant?
Less and less. I think that less and less Chainsaw and Cutter are comparable. There's too many features in Chainsaw that don't even exist in Cutter, or there's no workaround in Cutter to be close to what Chainsaw can do. So at some point, the comparison is not fair, and it becomes less and less relevant today.
What would you say to someone that is thinking of doing the same thing that you did? Meaning, I don't like what Project A is doing, or it's not giving me what I need. The maintainer is slow in merging PRs or not wanting to merge PRs, and that's their right as a maintainer. So I'm going to fork it, and I'm going to make my own fork. Is that the place to start? Or should you just skip the forking process and start writing from scratch?
I think it all depends on the experience with the tool. I think we used Cutter for at least 1 year and a half. So we were very aware of the limitations. It was very interesting to work with Cutter during those years. All those things we learned during 1 year and a half being frustrated by Cutter, all that gave the good ideas and the good strategy for Chainsaw. We have things we want to add in Chainsaw We didn't have the time to do that yet, but it will come. And for example, today, working with metrics in end-to-end test is a pain. You can't easily create your resource. You can check that the resource created, you can validate the desired state evolve to what you expect, but there's nothing to check that a metric was produced and matches the expectations. So this kind of thing is extremely important, and I know a bunch of Kyverno users, for example, rely on metrics to make sure that the Kyverno admission controller is working well, that their cluster is in a good, secure state, and things like this. So we can't neglect metrics. This is, in my opinion, extremely important to make sure that metrics are correct. And that's probably what we will address with Chainsaw next. That's the kind of thing we couldn't have done in Qtl. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to get out of Qtl, to allow Chainsaw to evolve even more outside the boundary of just what Qtl provided. So yes, I think that if they are confident enough that what they are going to build next is going to really solve real problems, they should do it. Maybe they forked a project to start with and then faced a lot of limitations. Maybe they didn't need to fork the project and try to improve the project. But if they are sure that what they are going to build is going to help them and potentially others, they should do it. And everyone will say, okay, thank you. Thank you for that. It really helps. It works. And it's great. Because I think Qtl is in the CNCF too.
It's not. I just checked it now. I was sure that it's in CNCF, but I just checked it. It's not. I was surprised myself.
Yeah, it is. It's in the Kudo org. Yeah, okay. And the Kudo org is in the CNCF.
Ah, okay.
But that still takes us back to the earlier conversation of what Victor brought up is, okay, is the CNCF looking at the org, or is it looking at the repositories within the org? To me, as an outsider to the CNCF, I mean, we know what the answer is based on what you said, but to me as an outsider of CNCF, I'm looking at the CNCF landscape, eye chart, if you will, and trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to use? And if I don't see, if I see Kyverno there, I'm just going to, because we've taught Kyverno today. So if I see Kyverno there, but I don't see Chainsaw there, then I'm not going to consider Chainsaw part of the CNCF. That's just logical to me. If it's not on the eye chart, it's not in it. Is that a fair statement?
CNCF is confusing. It's very confusing on many different levels. And that's one of those things that is confusing, right? Until half a year or something like that, I was sure that, hey, if I look at the project name in CNCF org chart, it's either there or it's not. It took me a while to actually understand that, yeah, actually CNCF projects are all the projects that are listed in CNCF plus all the projects in the organizations of the projects that are listed in CNCF. It's a bit of madness.
Yeah, and it's even more strange that you could imagine that a project in the CNCF is not managed by a single maintainer and that its project somehow given to the community. So the fact that we couldn't contribute to Qtl was confusing, because if it's a CNCF project, why is there only a single maintainer? Why can't we propose improvements and make Qtl better?
That's the thing that surprised me a lot in what you were saying before, right? That I would have expected that a project that is not maintained by original maintainer and so on and so forth, that CNCF itself would jump in and say, okay, let's change the maintainers, right? Let's add Charles as a maintainer because he's active in it and the original maintainer is not, and so on and so forth. I feel like as if CNCF should, as organization, put a bit more effort into making the projects healthy in a way, not just there, right?
Yeah, or at least they should have something like an offboarding process. Like you can have a project who is part of the CNCF at some point, and if this project doesn't evolve in a CNCF compatible way, it would make sense to offboard such a project and say that it's not CNCF sponsored anymore, because there's a couple of rules that should be respected by every project being part of the CNCF. And I know that, for example, we have other projects in the Kyverno organization, so they are under the Kyverno umbrella. And then we make sure that we have design proposals to change those projects. Not only Kyverno, but Kyverno JSON today goes through the KDP process to add features to the Kyverno JSON project, so that we are sure that the community can be involved in the improvements over those projects too, not just Kyverno, but every project in the Kyverno org has to go through this process. If someone wants to join as a contributor and eventually as a Chainsaw maintainer, is more than welcome.
I don't know that I agree with that statement. I think I used to agree with that statement. I don't know that I agree with that statement anymore in light of the XZ long con. I don't know that I believe anymore that anybody is welcome to join a project. I mean, I like to believe that. In my heart, I want to believe that. But just because you want to join doesn't make you compatible, I guess, with the project.
Oh, I don't say that we are going to accept all contributions. But if someone wants to be part of the team, can bring useful and significant contributions. And that's what we tried to do with Kettle, but it never happened. But to me, it would have made sense that we would have been accepted in the Kettle, maybe, I don't know, contributors or maintainers, because we wanted Kettle to evolve in a good direction. We didn't want to add any backdoor to Kettle.
You just wanted to get your work done. At a certain point, Cuddle was no longer able to support what you needed to get done. Nothing against Cuddle, right?
No.
It's just the vision for that project was different than the vision that you needed to actually ship.
Yeah, but in any case, one project with a single maintainer not being active is not a good sign of the project health. And to me, I hope that I will see more contributors joining and helping with Chainsaw. And if contributors are good enough and have enough time to do it, because maintaining a project takes time. And when you're alone doing it, it can be conflicting with the other priorities. Like, for example, these days I have to work on other things, so I have less time to work on Chainsaw. I will come back to it maybe next week or the week after, but that's not a big problem. I know that I will come back to Chainsaw at some point. But if I'm the only maintainer and don't dedicate time to the project, how can the project continue to evolve? And how can it be useful to others? I think if someone wants to be a maintainer and has the necessary skills to be a maintainer, is welcome to be part of the project.
So let's fast forward 10 years. Is Chainsaw done in 10 years? Like, we don't need to maintain it anymore. It is feature complete.
Who knows? There's constant evolutions in our environment. Today, I want to add metrics to Chainsaw, but maybe tomorrow I will want to add tracing tests to Chainsaw. Maybe we see a lot of projects around continuous profiling those days. There's Polar Systems, there's other folks doing continuous profiling. So maybe Chainsaw could make sure that continuous profiling is working as expected in those projects. We are talking about AI a lot. Could Chainsaw benefit from ChatGPT or another LLM to make testing even more assisted? Or something like that? I don't know, but this is not a project that will need evolutions every day. To me, it's like maybe a tool like curl. We don't need to add features to curl every day. I mean, it's just calling an HTTP endpoint, but at some point, I hope that Chainsaw will be sort of feature complete, except if something new emerges.
I feel that comparison with curl is, or CURL is not really a good one because, CURL is focused on HTTP, which is a closed spec, give or take, right? It's not changing. While Chainsaw is testing Kubernetes resources, essentially. And Kubernetes API itself is evolving all the time. We're getting new features. Like in the past, we didn't have admission controllers, right? If you created Chainsaw like 5 years ago, admission controllers would come later, and that would require some changes to Chainsaw, right? So it all depends on whether the technology that the project depends on, in this case Kubernetes, is evolving or no. And in case of CURL, HTTP is what it is, essentially, right?
In this sense, it's not a very fair comparison, I agree. But still, Kubernetes doesn't change that fast. Yeah, new features are coming, new things are coming in Kubernetes, but it's still quite mature API. The Kubernetes system is pretty stable. So I don't expect a lot of changes in Kubernetes. And if it happens, Chainsaw will have to be adapted to be able to test that too. So we had a lot of changes in Kubernetes recently, especially with Cell and everything around the way webhooks work. It's becoming very different. I expect that Cell will be more and more used in Kubernetes. That's probably something we will have to add in Chainsaw, and not really in Chainsaw, but in Kyverno JSON, actually. So Kyverno JSON today is using another language called GemSpace. But all this is completely abstract, so we should be able to use Cell instead of GemSpace, and it's probably a good thing for Kyverno JSON and Chainsaw, because more and more folks are going to learn Cell, to work with Cell, and then supporting Cell natively in Kyverno JSON and Chainsaw makes sense, because they will learn Cell and they won't need to learn GemSpace at all. They can do everything with Cell.
So you'll be able to get Cell in this weekend, I would assume. That's not a big deal, right?
GemSpace and Cell share the same properties. They are side effect-free languages, so it's very close to functional programming. In a weekend, it may be ambitious, but at least it's not replacing something with something else very different. It's like, something close enough to get this done.
So it's not like replacing PHP with Go?
No, definitely no. The syntax will be a bit different, but both tools share the same properties, so the same attributes.
Well, all of Charles's... Now, by the way, we never said your full name at the very beginning. So this is a good time. Say your full name.
My full name is Charles-Edouard Brétéché.
Which is why I am saying Charles.
Yeah.
So all of Charles's information is going to be down in the episode description. We'll also put a link off to Chainsaw there as well in case you're interested in doing end-to-end testing in Kubernetes. That's the ballpark of what Chainsaw is for.
Definitely.
You cannot be using Kubernetes and not be interested in testing. That's unacceptable.
I think you could actually change that. You cannot be interested in fill in the blank in the technology space
Exactly.
without doing testing.
You cannot not test. That's the phrase, right?
Testing is always what developers do at the end. They do testing if they have enough time or if their budget allows testing. So the simplest testing is, the better. If you need to write Golang code to do the test, everyone will try to avoid it and things like this. So yeah, tools like Kettle and Chainsaw make testing easy. And that's the most important because most of the time you can just copy-paste a couple of manifests and okay, that's a test.
I agree that for many developers, testing is chore that comes at the end, right? And very often there is no time to do it because it comes at the end. And that's where I fundamentally disagree with all those developers because I don't see testing as additional thing that is a chore to do. I see testing as a way how to develop something faster. I'm so much faster writing code when I have tests than without, right? It's not something that takes extra time. It's something that removes time or speeds up development, right? I know that many people don't see it like that, but that's where I fundamentally disagree with all of them.
I think I agree with you. But if you imagine it this way, being able to write tests in an easy way is important.
Oh, yeah.
So the easiest you can write tests, the better. Because if you have to use Golang and something complicated to write the test, you face the risk that the test is wrong, it's not maintained, it's irrelevant, and things like this. For example, with Kyverno, most of the time when someone opens an issue on GitHub, it provides the manifests to reproduce the issue. And we can almost copy-paste those manifests that the user provided, make a test from that, and push that in Git. Doing this, we can make sure that the bug will not happen anymore in the future. If we had to translate those manifests into a programming language to create the corresponding test, it would take a lot of time, and we probably would not make the effort of doing this. But now we have no excuse. We have the manifests, we have the tool to create a test from those manifests. It's only 5 minutes, so it would be really not serious if we didn't take the time to create the corresponding test for the issue that a user reported. So, yes, this is another discussion. Should we test or shouldn't we test? But if you want to do testing and do that easily, give Chainsaw a try, and it will probably add some benefit to your project. Really.
So again, all of Charles's information is going to be down in the episode description. Charles, thanks for being on with us today.
Thank you.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at DevOpsParadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.